and welcome to this week's episode of the Maine Challenge. This week we talk about fake news and disinformation. I have the honor of speaking with Bill Nemitz, a well-respected Maine journalist and columnist. And then we hear from Alex Kotch, who's from the Center for Media and Democracy. And then I sound off on this thing that I think we all need to pay really close attention to. Thanks for tuning in, and have a listen.
It's nighttime in a kitchen just like yours. All is quiet. Or is it? The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States. House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked. They come out at night to search for food, water, and materials for their nests. The favorite foods of the house hippo are chips, raisins, and the crumbs from peanut butter on toast. They build their nests in bedroom closets, using lost mittens, dryer lint, and bits of string. The nests have to be very soft and warm. House hippos sleep about 16 hours a day.
That looked really real, but you knew it couldn't be true, didn't you? That's why it's good to think about what you're watching on TV and ask questions, kind of like you just did. A message from Concerned Children's Advertisers.
Welcome to this week's Maine Challenge. I am so honored to have with us columnist for the Portland Press Herald and truth teller extraordinaire, Bill Nemitz. So Bill, thank you very much for joining us and taking some time out to really talk about this issue about fake news, disinformation that seems to be pervasive in our society right now. So thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Betsy. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. So let me start with a really easy question. So from your perspective, you've been doing news and news reporting, and you've traveled abroad and all kinds of things for a long time. What would you say is the sort of state of news at this point, or the state of information, or, where are we right now?
My goodness.
I know. I was kidding when I said easy.
A lot of terrible adjectives come to mind.
Yeah, go for it.
We're conflicted. We're, I think, in many ways, what we have always referred to as the truth is under assault, and I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for the community writ large to hear the message. So I think for those of us in the news journalism business, it's no longer a question of just putting it out there and assuming that a broad swath of the population is going to receive and consume that information. It's much more complicated than that now. There are some people you hear all the time. There are other people you're never going to reach because they've just basically tuned out what they refer to as the mainstream media. So, yeah, it's become a very hard time. I've been a journalist for going on 44 years now, and I've never found it so challenging as it is right now.
Wow. Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, back in the day, and, been doing political activism for almost as long as you've been a journalist, there was the facts, and then we all had opinions about the facts, or we had our spin on the facts, if you will, or we had our take on the facts, or whatever. But now it feels like there's almost no agreement or no willingness to say, yes, there is a set of facts that are just the facts. And
right.
So how do you deal with that?
The easy answer is you just keep leaning into the wind, and you keep trying to put out, what is demonstrably true based on, reporting, old-fashioned, reporting, and confirmation and all that kind of stuff. And that's something that we really need to keep on keeping on, no matter what the conditions. That said, you raise a very good point about what is fact and what is opinion. Those lines have very much been blurred, and that's not to say that there is no place for opinion. I'm an opinion writer, so so I mean, there is certainly a place for that, but our ability to distinguish between the two has blurred tremendously. And in addition to that, facts are no longer, or truth, I should say, is no longer, there's no longer a common ground for what is truth. I was in a doctor's office the other day, and the guy in the waiting room turns to me and he says, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "What?" And he says, Social Security is going up 8% in January. And I thought, I thought I was 5.9%. And I didn't know whether to challenge him or not. So I decided to just go along and go, oh, that's great. Not knowing quite where he was coming from.
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, telling me about the tractor trailer truck that was stopped on 295 because it got in the middle of an Army convoy, and they opened up the back of the tractor trailer truck, and there are 100 terrorists in there who were armed. And so, and he's saying this face dead on. He has absolutely complete faith in what he's saying. I didn't know what to say. So finally, thank God, my doctor said, "I'm ready now." I was able to get it. But it was one of those glimpses into this alternate world, in which many people live. Now, you could say perhaps that gentleman was delusional or was having some kind of mental health issues. And 10 years ago, that would have been my conclusion.
Yeah.
But it no longer is. It no longer is because, you hear someone just told me that her sister called after finally getting the vaccine for COVID-19 to report that she's magnetic.
Yeah.
What do you say? So I think that the real challenge is in penetrating those bubbles and trying to get some way in so that folks will at least listen.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge right now.
Yeah. And it just seems, it does seem almost impossible. We hear these, what seem to be outlandish facts that people are moving by. And so let's talk for a minute about the sort of then what happens. So when we have this inability or the unwillingness to agree on a set of facts, then it seems to me that creates doubt in people looking at news. So whenever they look at mainstream media, or when I look at Fox News or what, and I'm like, oh, I wouldn't even think about that. People have depended on the news for making their political decisions, for democracy, even for the economy. Like it used to be when they would say the economy's up. Well, people would use that as a way to feel good about the economy. And like, I'll go buy one.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Go out and buy a new car. Right.
Exactly. Right. So what do you think is the impact, and how are we going to?
I think it's really serious, and I think it plays into a lot of other really critical things that are issues that are being debated and fought right now. The Voter Rights Act is a good example. There are things that go right to the heart of our democracy, and right to the heart of our well-being in terms of some of the disinformation that's flying around COVID right now. So it's dangerous. This is serious stuff. This is no longer my neighbor who I think is in loony land because he holds much different political beliefs than I do. These issues are going right to the heart of who we are and how we live our lives. So I think it's very serious. You mentioned Fox News, and I think there is a big problem there, we all know, with the way they report things and what they report. But sometimes I think Fox News is its impact is exaggerated. I don't think Fox News really reaches as many people as some of us would like to think it does. If it were true, if Fox was reaching 50 million people a night versus 1 million people a night, it'd be very easy for those who disagree with it to put all the emphasis Fox and say, if we can just solve the Fox problem, we'll solve it. But I think it's more complicated than that. I think much of it lies beyond Fox, and it resides more in the social media realm, and some of these ongoing efforts to put stuff out there by all kinds of nefarious groups that get caught up and shared.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into the question of who's responsible then. I'm gonna go back. The heart of democracy. I agree with you, Bill. I feel like there are people who posit that this is the way that you take down a democracy, right? The first, don't trust the information, don't trust the news, don't trust anything. Trust me. I'm the one who trusts so and so. But so what is the responsibility of the news media, the mainstream media, or we'll talk about social media later, but to say, so for example, with the voter stuff, this accusation that there's massive, widespread voter fraud. We see it in Maine, right? There's a bill in the legislature because there's, to protect from massive voter fraud. That's just not true.
It's not there.
It's not there. And yet the media continues to report, I know they're reporting somebody else saying it, but like, is there a line in the sand? Is there a responsibility of the media to say, this is not accurate? This is just.
I hear what you say. I think there's a lot of emphasis, and part of it is because as journalists, this is what we're trained to do. We have always been trained to get the other side, and this is in the interest of balance, objectivity, whatever you want to call it. And that model has worked pretty well for the first 35 years of my career, and it's changed now in that it becomes a trap because you start amplifying things that, in all honesty, just don't warrant amplification because they're so outrageous, they're so divorced from reality that I think we need to realize that in some cases we do a disservice to the community as a whole if we those things, this false equivalency with something that is vetted, something that's provable. And something that people need to hear. On the other hand, those who say, just ignore them. But I think there's also a danger there because if you simply ignore them, we get surprised because suddenly I think the election of Donald Trump is probably, exhibit A here where no, that could never happen. That's impossible. We don't need to worry. Right up until election night, there were people saying that.
Absolutely.
And I think what the surprise there was rooted in the fact that we in the media and the community, again, as a whole, were largely ignoring what was being said and what was being shared. And what that whole drumbeat that propelled Trump into we weren't paying enough attention to it.
Yeah.
So there is a balance there. I think that we need to relentlessly report the truth every time we talk about election or voter protection. We need to pound away at the fact that there is no evidence of what they claim here, Pennsylvania, wherever, that there's simply no evidence of this, and that these Rudy Giuliani and others who are claiming otherwise are just simply not telling the truth. On the other hand, I think we also need to get at those echo chambers. And this brings me to not go by going after Fox. Fox is Fox. It's going to, you can't shut down Fox. Yeah. But we can look at the arenas in which this message takes place. Finally, at long last, Facebook and Twitter and other social media are having their feet held a little more closely to the fire when it comes to allowing the proliferation of this. And I think that's good. I think that's a long, hard fight. But until then, until we can try to rein in some of this blatant lying and fabrication that's taking place out there, all we can do is pound away at the truth. And I find with individual conversations, I have a neighbor who's a Trump supporter, and we talk. We're friends. We don't throw rocks at each other. And I found on occasion when something comes up and he states that he knows to be fact, and I say, well, that's not true, and citing specific evidence to disprove it, it works. And he'll say, oh, really? Well, I didn't know that. Yeah. And that's on a very micro level. I'm not sure how we do that on a macro level. You can refer people to Snopes and other fact checker sites all you want. But the fact is, I think Snopes and sites like that, we use, those of us who think something is false, we use it to reinforce our belief that something is false. The problem is the people who are spreading that falsehood, they don't go to Snopes.
No.
So it's not as useful. So I think a lot of it is per contact. I think a lot of it is pounding away, as I said, at the truth. and ultimately trying to impose some kind of controls over these social media platforms, which in many ways have replaced the news.
Yeah, absolutely.
To ensure that there's a little more discipline there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was with a group of young people in their 20s and with my children. And, I just asked them, as 12 kids, and I said, young people, and I said, so where do you get your news? I was just curious. I was just like, where'd you get your news? Every single one of them said Snapchat.
Yep.
I said, wait, Snapchat's when you send a funny picture of your dog. Like,
that's
and
right.
I didn't know that the New York Times and Washington Post and everybody else has a Snapchat. So I think you're right. I think people are replacing it. And I think that's partially as a result of this drumbeat that has been that you can't trust the mainstream media, that you can't trust the news people, you can't trust, and that's been a drumbeat certainly exaggerated in the last 4 years under Trump. Sure. But before that, it's like the mainstream media is the enemy instead of being, the Walter Cronkites of the world telling us, what's going to be, what's going to be,
right.
Yeah,
it's kill the messenger syndrome. If you don't like what's happening, rather than try to change it, just go after the messenger. And that's new. That's been happening since there's been a freeze, but it certainly is exacerbated by some of the politics of these days. And, I too feel like a dinosaur. I watch Lester Holt every night, and meanwhile, those of our generation don't realize what's going on Snapchat, what's going on Instagram. And we have this perception of these sites that is changing fast.
Really.
Unless you're on it, it's hard to keep up with it.
It's really true. It's really true. So let me just ask you, where do you get your news besides Lester? In addition to
well, I'm very mainstream, I'm afraid. I look at the Washington Post, the New York Times, Boston Globe, Herald. So I do the first 2 hours of my day is consumed with often still in bed, with my cup of tea, just reading. And so there's that. And then I do like to do, the deeper dive. A good example is there was a time not too long ago when Wikipedia was verboten journalism. You cannot quote Wikipedia. It's not reliable. It's not, it's not like the Encyclopedia Britannica, those kind of things. But that's changed to the point where actually Wikipedia has become a much more useful resource to a point. Mm-hmm. I've found numerous misstatements on Wikipedia. One, for example, was there was a reference to a ball player. I don't know why he's doing this, but he was thrown out of a game back in 1975. And I saw this reference to it and I thought, doesn't sound right. So I went and checked the footnote, because Wikipedia is very heavily footnote. Checked the footnote, and sure enough, in the footnote, the reference story, it was a different player. So Wikipedia's footnoting us to a story that proved what they just said is false. But my point is, the one thing I think Wikipedia is very useful for is finding that material into which you can do a deeper dive. If it cites which you can find the research and look at it yourself. If it cites, a 75-page report, you can find the report. And if you're so inclined, go into that stuff. So it has opened up a lot of reference material that I think is very useful. Question, I do this for a living, so I fail to do that at my own. It's a tough sell for people who are juggling lives and kids and schedules. Well, instead of hearing about that report, read it.
Right. Exactly. All right. So last question. So your source of hope, optimism, do you have one?
Always.
I know. That's why I love you, Bill.
No, I can't. I just can't concede to the dark side here. I think that I am a real believer in the pendulum theory. That over the course of our history, our country's history, if not world history, it is a pendulum. and we swing into dark times, and inevitably it swings back into brighter times. And I feel right now we're still in fairly dark times, and I wish I had the big answers to the big questions. And sometimes you just have to let things play out, and sometimes you just have to rely on the essential goodwill of people. Yeah. And so while I'm distressed and alarmed by what's going on right now, I do believe that when you hit the dream, inevitably, it's almost a law of physics that pendulum will start to swing in the other direction. And to some extent, I think that's just now, but it has a long way to go.
Has a long way to go, and I'm with you, and I am the eternal optimist, and I believe in the goodness of people. I get so concerned as how far down we have to go.
Exactly. Yeah, and how many people have to suffer in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Bill. This is wonderful. I look forward to your columns all the time and learn so much. And so I really appreciate the work that you do, and thanks for continuing to tell the truth.
Well, thank you, Betsy. It's been fun chatting. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yes, we will. Awesome.
I'm Alex Kotch, a senior investigative reporter with the Center for Media and Democracy. For well over a century, conservative politicians and activists have been exaggerating the risk of voter fraud to justify restrictive voting laws and election practices. But it's no secret that in the last few years, this effort has gone into a modern-day hyperdrive. Leading up to the 2020 elections, the political right spread lies about imagined voter fraud via expanded voting practices like mail-in balloting, which was essential during an airborne pandemic, and ballot drop boxes. Then, after Election Day, the right wing claimed without evidence that in numerous states, the election was stolen from Donald Trump because of voter fraud and liberal corruption. And now, in 2021, right-wing nonprofit organizations and GOP lawmakers have used these lies to justify creating new, heavily suppressive voting laws that critics have called Jim Crow 2.0. To understand the big lie of widespread voter fraud, you need to examine and follow the money behind three groups of actors. 1, nonprofit policy and activist groups. 2, right-wing media outlets. And 3, the politicians themselves. These three groups work together to achieve their goal, which is to present people they think favor the Democrats from voting. And they share major right-wing funders, including the foundations of the Bradleys, Kochs, Uihleins, Scaife, and Thomas W. Smith, as well as pass-through funds such as Donors Trust. Think tanks pushing the voter fraud myth include the Heritage Foundation and smaller election-focused nonprofit groups such as the Honest Elections Project, True the Vote, and the Public Interest Legal Foundation. The Heritage Foundation and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, worked together to craft some of the worst state voter suppression bills this year and lobby for their passage.
A coastal resort protected by armed guards. That was the private meeting place for Georgia legislators and corporate lobbyists.
Now, who paid for it all? That's the big question. Chief Investigator Brendan Keith holds the powerful accountable tonight. Brendan?
The 11 Alive investigators discovered an organization that gets money from lobbyists, gives it to legislators, and it's all considered charity. We found the fabled back rooms where laws are really made.
Are laws being made in there?
This isn't the state capitol. It's a resort hotel in Savannah where lawmakers are wined and dined as members of the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC.
What is ALEC?
It's really a corporate bill mill. I mean, they're cranking out legislation, putting it in the hands of legislators who go back and file it.
You're telling me that in these rooms, a corporation has an equal vote with a legislator on a piece of legislation?
They absolutely vote, and the truth be told, they write the bills.
In a video CMD obtained, ALEC's CEO talked about outsourcing its voter suppression policy work, which it falsely claims to the public it doesn't do, to the Honest Elections Project, which is led by a former Heritage staffer. ALEC-affiliated lawmakers have proposed and passed many of the nation's voter suppression bills this year, and some are campaigning even for the top elections oversight jobs in their states. Allied activist groups such as the youth outreach group Turning Point USA and the Tea Party Patriots run with the big lie, converting their followers, hosting events, and making media appearances. TPUSA is funded by Bradley, Scaife, Smith, Uihlein, and Donors Trust, and Uihlein bankrolls the Tea Party Patriots. Right-wing media is financed by many of the same megadonors as these think tanks and activist groups. The Daily Caller and Real Clear Politics both rely on donations from Bradley, Koch, Uline, Scaife, Smith, and Donors Trust, and The Federalist gets funding from Uline, Smith, and Donors Trust. These megadonors' investments have paid off. The right-wing media is an echo chamber of conspiracy theories, including the big lie, and they're able to spread the fabrications farther than think tanks and most individuals can. Other outlets, including Fox News, with its star host, Daily Caller founder Tucker Carlson, Breitbart, Newsmax, and the Daily Wire also play major roles in this propaganda, and they frequently interview high-profile politicians and pundits who spread the voter fraud myth to their audiences. The fish rots from the head, and the GOP's top politicians, including Trump, members of Congress, and high-ranking state officials, have been chief purveyors of the big lie. In fact, 147 Republican U.S. reps and senators voted to overturn Biden's victory in at least one state, an endorsement of the election fraud conspiracy. And there's a loop here. By spreading the voter fraud myth along with allied think tanks and media, these politicians are brainwashing their followers and inspiring them to take action, most dangerously during the deadly January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And when, as a result, their followers say they're concerned about voter fraud, these politicians use that concern, which they helped create, to justify suppressing the vote. In other words, to subvert future elections under the guise of reform. There's one final layer to this propaganda that's essential to its spread. Corporate social media companies, especially Facebook and YouTube, use algorithms that promote extremist content and conspiracy theories to maximize their profits at the expense of the public good. Without these massive media tools, bad actors would not be as effective at spreading the big lie.
Here are some fake news headlines from recent times. AOC proposes a nationwide motorcycle ban. Obama signs an executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance nationwide. Donald Trump sends his own plane to transport 200 stranded Marines. Bill and Hillary Clinton are operating a pedophile sex ring out of a pizza joint. A babysitter is transported to a hospital after inserting a baby into her vagina. And the one that really got me upset, U.S. bacon reserves at a 50-year low. Funny? Not funny. Sociologists, political scientists, and historians all say that the first way to tear down a democracy is to make sure that people don't trust the news, don't trust the sources, don't trust the facts. And yes, we have always had tabloids in the grocery aisle checkout that say that Betty White has been abducted by aliens. But we are in much more dangerous territory. These kinds of stories now, and political stories and disinformation, is seeping into everything, traditional news sources as well as ones on the margin. It used to be that we could trust the facts, and there were facts. And then people had opinions about the facts, and that's okay. But now we can't even trust the facts. Things that scientists tell us, things that we see with our own eyes. You know, when someone says, no, that's not what you saw, and then they explain it in a different way, or they put a different lens on it, and then we hear it over and over again, and we read it, and we see it on TV, and we hear it on the radio, and then we start to believe that is the truth, and it becomes the truth from which everything else sprouts. We are in dangerous territory indeed. So what do we do about it? How do we stop the spread of disinformation? How do we stop fake news? Well, I think this is going to be a personal responsibility that you and I each have to take on. First of all, we have to be discerning. If something sounds too outlandish to be true, then it probably is not true. I mean, Betty is really not living with aliens. Come on. Second, I think we have to check multiple sources. We have to look at a number of things to see if we are getting the same version of the story from different perspectives, because then you can distill the truth from. And when we hear something or read something, we have to look at who is paying for that story, who is paying for that publication or that radio or TV station. And a blog post is not news. And if you are watching a news source or reading a news source that you always agree with, it's probably biased too, because we don't always agree with everything. That's a biased source of information. Look, we each have to take this on as a personal responsibility. We have to check ourselves. We have to talk to our friends and neighbors who we hear spreading things that we think are fake news. This is the only way, and it's one thing that we can do to preserve this foundation of democracy, which I believe is hanging on by a thread.